All right, welcome back. This is episode 10.5. And what are we going to talk about today?
I thought you were mentioning like economics, capitalism, maybe money systems.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds interesting.
Okay. Or we could talk about celestial bodies.
Yeah. No, maybe
eclipses.
Another time. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So one question I've been thinking about is how important is money?
Pretty freaking important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those, again, civilization games where if you get currency, it's a pretty big leap in technology.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a proof of some kind of effort or labor, right? That can be exchanged. Because before that was a barter system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in order to barter, right, you have to basically trust to know the person. But once you have a system of currency that's been standardized, you can start trading with all sorts of different people, right?
Or even before barter system, there's just like basic survival, right? Like in a tribal society.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hunt? Cool, you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Can you be productive rather than have some kind of... Yeah. And then, so what was like some of the early currencies that are known to exist?
Like
the
seashells?
Yeah, seashells. I know, beads.
Like ropes.
Mm-hmm. Ropes. I'm sure they had to deal with some counterfeiting back then as well.
Mm-hmm. As civilization progresses, the counterfeiting gets more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Now we have like money with holograms and watermarks and all this crazy coloring and
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not to mention cryptocurrency.
Right. So then that's a whole nother story that would be fascinating to get into. What I also thought was interesting is just how like economies emerge when you have some kind of limited resource. Like when we used to play EverQuest, you'd like kill beetles and you'd pick up copper coins, right? And eventually you collect platinum and then you just trade it with people in the game. And it becomes basically like a proof of effort of killing monsters and collecting money. Mm-hmm. And then that can be traded within the game environment. And just kind of like an organic thing that just happens.
Unless you buy platinum on eBay.
You're right. Or you can make money, People sell on accounts for that.
I don't know if you remember this, but back in the day, people would sell platinum on eBay.
Oh, yeah.
And I computed that like dollar to platinum conversion rate.
Mm-hmm.
And the average was stronger than the Mexican peso.
Yeah. I'm sure that's true now for a lot more games too. That's crazy.
That's just bizarre.
Yeah.
That a national currency, that a fake digital game currency would be more than a national currency.
Yeah. You could probably make more money killing fire beetles and commons than working at some laundromat or something.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure there are people that do that, like grinders.
Right. Well, I know like in China, that was a huge issue of like these Chinese farms that would just totally wreck the game economy because they just like put bots in there and run like 10 accounts and collect all this gold and then sell it to people on eBay.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing. But when you even have any kind of restricted system like that with some kind of means of exchange, these things just happen, which I think is pretty cool in terms of just a general systems. And also thinking about markets, like free markets is almost like a living organism. I always thought that was also like a kind of cool concept.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk said something like the internet is like the collective id of humanity.
Yeah.
Like all our basest unconscious desires are like manifested online.
Yeah. And you could probably even look at like the percentage of traffic. Like I think it's some ridiculous number in terms of pornography.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 70% of the internet traffic in terms of the data, the terabytes, the petabytes, is just pornography. Mm-hmm. So it's like all of this primal id desire that's just, I'd be curious if we like
Quantify it.
quantified it also like with the humans, an average human psyche,
Mhm.
and see like how much traffic is going on there. That would be pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See what the correlation is.
I don't know how you'd quantify it. I'm sure could be some way you could get some estimation.
Mhm.
But that's how Freud also, I think, kind of structured it too. Is that the id is this huge, like, source of information and processing, and then like the ego and the superego are kind of like tip of the iceberg kind of phenomenon.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what are different kinds of you know um, economies? I actually don't know much about that. I mean, I know like socialist or like communist economies and capitalist economies or free markets, but there's like all sorts of in between things.
Like hybrids, yeah. So the it's a market economy
Mm-hmm.
where the market dictates the prices and there's trade and exchange and markets go up and down. The other extreme is a command economy,
Mm.
and that's what communists try to do is just nationalize
Yeah.
all the businesses. So all the businesses are owned by the government.
Mm-hmm.
The government determines how much is made, what it costs, what people are paid, and they just control or attempt to control every aspect of the economy.
Right. So they have some system where they determine how much this effort is worth or this product or whatever that thing is
Mm-hmm.
in a way to try to make things more fair. I think is that the goal or
Or
equitable,
efficient, yeah.
efficient. Yeah, interesting.
So what happens in a market economy? Like let's say there's a grain shortage,
Mm-hmm.
so then the market would say, hey, let's buy land and start planting grain,
Mm-hmm.
and then because the grain prices go up, then farmers start creating more grain.
Mm-hmm.
So the market would meet the demand of whatever is in low supply.
Yeah.
But in a command economy, it's like, okay, I'm ordering you to make grain because that's what we need.
Right. I guess in that sense, that maybe a command economy could also respond more swiftly than like a capitalist one, where you kind of have to assess the value or the unmet need,
Mm-hmm.
and then once that is like determined just through basic trade patterns, then you have to like start that up. But maybe like in a command economy, you can see some writing on the wall and start like hiring grain farmers more immediately.
Well, I was recently watching some videos on this, and they were talking about like the Chinese Great Leap Forward, or you know the Soviet Union industrializing.
Mm.
They just said, okay, we're industrializing. This is what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just like force of will. And it actually the economy was okay to begin with, but the problem with the command economies is they don't adapt very well.
Mm.
And the market economies, I think they adapt faster, but like from the individual's perspective, it's a gamble, right? It's boom or bust, because like I might invest in tomatoes and you invest in grain,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe nobody wants tomatoes but everybody wants grain, so
Yeah.
I'm broke and you're rich.
Right.
But from the perspective of the market, everyone's needs are met.
Mm-hmm. And also from the perspective of the market is you don't really need to anticipate things. I mean, if you can anticipate things, you can. That's an opportunity to make money.
Mm-hmm.
But it will just adapt to whatever the circumstances.
Yeah.
Where a command economy is like you have to have like 100% foresight of every possible outcome, and that's just untenable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then you also have these weird mixes. Like I know in the United States, since we're talking about farming, the government can like subsidize the crap out of things
And does.
and puts their finger on the scale, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I know corn has been a huge one,
Yeah.
and I don't understand like those kinds of reasons. But what's also kind of crazy is these farmers, from what I understand, the margin of profit is like fractions of percents.
Mm-hmm.
They're spending like millions of dollars like growing these crops, doing like hiring the labor, all this really expensive equipment, and they make like basically nothing off after all their costs.
Mm-hmm.
Which I was pretty shocked to hear that because of the scale of the operations that they do.
Yeah, and like little guys can't even compete with that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, from what I understand, the only reason like corn or a lot of these farmers are even able to make money is because the government is paying them to grow. At least that's what I understand.
Hmm. I think another good counterexample is water,
Mm.
because you could imagine a world where free market economy for water, and your
Mm-hmm.
prices would like shoot up and go down, and you'd have
Mm-hmm.
monopolies on water and like people hoarding water. It's like, yeah, maybe we don't want, you know, water prices being completely vulnerable to a free market.
Did you ever see that Mad Max movie, the new one?
I don't think
It
so.
was basically like this dictator tyrant type person who had the control of the water,
Okay.
and he'd like go out into his like castle and he has a window and he would like pour water over it and all the people were like water water and it was just like total control because these the people in power had access to the water.
Mm-hmm. There's some of that in Dune as well.
I haven't seen the next one.
Well, I don't know. I don't think they showed it as much in the movies, but in the book, like you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine, this desert planet, and water is just super precious to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about conserving water, and yeah. So, anyways, I think having regulation on prices for water, that makes sense,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because you wouldn't want the prices to go crazy up and down and have monopolies on that.
on something that's so essential,
Yeah.
and it's literally falling out of the sky too, so
Right.
it's like how much can you actually charge for that?
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, so like ideally the more luxurious an item is, the more it's driven by the free market, and the more
Mm-hmm.
necessary it is, the more you might want to prevent like radical
Yeah,
fluctuations.
yeah. So there, I mean, I guess some kind of oversight or centralization, and not like complete laissez-faire, could be sensible in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems, and this is like with the corn thing, I think those policies were made, I don't even know how long ago, like 100 years,
Mm.
maybe more.
I think it was maybe because of the Great Depression.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the idea is, well, that might have been a nice stopgap measure for the Great Depression, but
Hmm.
we've moved on.
Yeah.
But no, so many people are locked into that system; they're reluctant to change.
Yeah. Once you give up some of that control, it's like rescinding it is near impossible. It's like a one way trip.
Hmm.
Yeah. Pretty interesting.
Another market I've been thinking about is Magic: The Gathering,
Mm-hmm.
because part of it's collectible,
Mm-hmm.
like how old the cards are, and then part of the value is determined by the game itself,
Mm-hmm.
and then part of the value is, are they reprinting it or are they not reprinting it?
Yeah.
So the number in circulation versus the use in the game versus the collectability.
Yeah, and I mean that it's a pretty vibrant market. Like, what was that Black Lotus that was sold by? Oh no, it was the One Ring,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Who got that? It was some
Post
singer.
Malone.
Post Malone bought
Mm-hmm.
that for like millions of dollars or
Mm-hmm.
something. It's so cool that that game is still that popular. It's been around. What Richard Garfield did that back in the 80s or something.
I think it was like
90s.
94, 95.
I remember we went to that museum. Or did you go to that one? No, I think
So.
I think I did. There's a museum in Seattle. It's called the EPM, I think. Anyways, there was like this whole like fantasy um, exhibit, and they had some of Richard Garfield's like original like garage sketches of his cards.
Nice.
So they're like penciled and cut out with like scissors. And I was like, I remember doing that, but not magic cards.
Right.
But I wish I did. Making games. Yeah, another really super interesting thing, since you're talking about like collectability too, and is there's an interesting uh, resurgence, or I'd say investment in like high art or expensive art pieces. And what I'm hearing is that that's another really good way to hedge against inflation. And there's even companies where you can buy like shares into
Right.
like some piece of art.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of it is like NFT or like crypto. So
Mm,
your share is like digital digitally encoded to you,
yeah,
your deed or whatever.
which is really interesting. When everything gets all digital like this, there's just some really curious things that
It's
can.
like funny money.
But it's not. It's like it's somewhere in this weird limbo state.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the whole blockchain technology is fascinating. Speaking of which, so I went to see this eclipse, and we got into conversations about like different kinds of just like random events where you could have like comets or impacts or all these like space objects. And another thing that could happen is actually these massive solar flares.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is something I'd be curious about. So if you have like a massive solar flare, it's essentially like an EMP wave that can actually shut down like all sorts of electronics.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've got to thinking, because so there's like this Carrington event, is what it was called back in the like 30s or something. I forget. But it shut down like the power grids everywhere. And I was just thinking, like, what's going to happen to like Bitcoin if we have like a Carrington event and then just like things just get wiped?
Well, Bitcoin is interesting because the ledger is distributed.
Mm-hmm.
So like all the computers that are mining, my understanding is they're working on the ledger.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like copies of it all over the place.
Yeah.
And the problem is actually when you have ledgers with different information, right? So they should all be synchronized, linked up, and have the same accounts all transferred.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to wipe out Bitcoin, you'd have to wipe out like all the hard drives simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, that's what I just don't know enough about it. Maybe I should look into it. But I'm sure someone's thought about this too. But like, if there's a giant EMP that hits Earth and like basically powers down all electronic equipment for a day,
Yeah.
that seems like it could be pretty chaos.
Yeah, I mean, it would be more than just Bitcoin,
It
right?
would be
Just like
credit cards,
all the
banks,
credit cards, yeah, all the bank accounts.
tax information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's probably some, what do you say, safeguards in place for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember it hit some time back in the day, like the radios went out and stuff, and it was just really crazy. Should look it up.
Mm-hmm.
But just got me thinking, since everything now is becoming so digitized, even all the money, your ownership of property is now like proof of ownership with these NFTs and things, and that's where it's going. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. But the distributed network is also kind of a cool thing. So I don't know if you heard though, but Bitcoin just halved recently.
Okay.
Have you heard of how that works? It's pretty cool. The guy who
doubling essentially.
no. So that's or that's like in stocks or something.
Okay.
So Satoshi Nakamura,
Yeah.
alias probably, but it's basically the person who wrote the code and gave it out there. He had it so that every 4 years, the miners who are mining Bitcoin, essentially doing these hash functions, get paid in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And every 4 years, the amount that they get paid for the same amount of work halves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is to choke out the supply over time, and make it
So it's a finite
rarer.
supply. Yeah.
And it's like kind of like gold. It's like, I don't know, 100 years ago, it didn't cost as much and was much easier to mine gold.
Mm-hmm.
But now is for extracting more. You can still do it, but you got to like spend more to get it out.
Mm-hmm.
So this is supposed to be one of these things where Bitcoin's going to increase in value because there's like this pre-planned like limiting of the supply. And I forgot what year it is, but there's some year where no more Bitcoins are going to be minted. And it's just, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way Bitcoin can be minted is by doing these mining functions.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's also interesting because like some accounts are just lost.
yeah,
Like,
right.
if you have your key or whatever and it gets burnt up and forgotten, you can't hack it because that's the whole point.
It's floating around somewhere on the ledger, but no one's got access to it.
Right.
Yeah. So that's another source of limiting availability. So this is another concept, since I know you like philosophy and stuff like that. So one thing that goes with money and economy, right, also comes this idea of like property.
Mm-hmm.
And those aren't necessarily the same thing, but it's almost like I hear them hand in hand quite frequently. So, how does the idea of or concept of private property or ownership play into like an economy? Like a,
That's capitalism 101.
yeah. So yeah, tell me about it.
Well, so you could take the philosophical approach, but I prefer to start with the psychological approach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why I think capitalism is such a strong system, is because it's rooted in just basic psychology.
Mm-hmm. Self interest.
Not only that, but just like if you're a caveman, how do you know that the stone axe is yours?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, you hold it, like
Mm.
you have the thing. It's so ownership is very visceral,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a sense of even kids, mine, mine.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very deep. It's a very deep instinct. This idea of property or ownership.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to teach somebody what that means or how it works.
And that's not only that, but like I've seen like, chimps or gorillas, if they have something and someone else sees they have something, it doesn't matter what it is. I want to know what that monkey's holding, that other guy's holding.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like an innate fascination of what do they have and can I benefit from it somehow or
Yeah. So that there's a special name for that. I think it's called mimetic desire.
wow.
So the idea that your desire is based on mimicking what somebody else wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So this concept of possession goes back very far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's better to start there in just terms of basic psychology. Like it's just part of our species.
Well, here's another thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could see this is even like pre-primate. Like you have different kinds of like deer or bears or whatever who have like territories,
Right.
and it's like this is mine, and if you come over here, I'm gonna mess you up.
That's right. They defend their territory.
Which is basically their property if we want to formalize
Yeah,
it.
defending their property for sure.
Yeah. Interesting.
So then capitalism just makes that explicitly legal in terms of contracts and titles and, just written record of who owns what. But like the instinct is already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then there also has to be some kind of like enforcement.
Hmm.
I guess it previously was probably self-enforced, where literally, if you take my thing, I'm gonna beat the crap out of you or kill you,
Right.
depending on how primitive you go with that.
Right. I was thinking of a farmer with the shotgun.
Yeah.
Get off my property.
Clint Eastwood out
Yeah.
there. Yeah. Yeah, there's something to be said about that. Definitely. And how many wars and civil disorders and revolutions has happened because of basically governments taxing people to oblivion,
Yeah.
you know?
Let them eat cake.
Yeah. And then the whole American Revolution, too. Just giving.
Don't tax us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's a big deal. So, are there any other kinds of economies that don't necessarily fall into like the capitalist free market
So
and the command economy?
there are different economic theories. So, like if you study economists, there's the Keynesian model, which is
Mhm.
which is like, you have these ups and downs in terms of the economy, and Keynes tries to like make the big not so big and
Yeah.
the low not so low.
That's kind of what the Fed is doing by tweaking the interest rates. and all
Yeah, so that comes from his philosophy.
that. Okay, I have heard of that. Yeah,
And then the Austrian school, I think that the main guy's name is Mises.
I've heard of this. I think it was like, yeah, I know it's getting more popular because a lot of people are not a fan of the Keynesian approach and they think it's like getting outdated and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how is the Austrian thing? What's their?
It's free market. It's more laissez-faire. The idea that the market will correct.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then, so I'm not an economist or anything, but you always hear about, when the big, like 2008 bailouts were happening, that was like a Keynesian, let's keep the financial institutions afloat.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas something would be more, I guess, this Austrian thing would just like, let them drown and then let the market correct itself.
Yeah, there's also some other basic assumptions too about like supply and demand
Mm.
and how is supply and demand organic or is it influenced? So and that those are some interesting ideas too.
Mm-hmm.
Then of course Marx and his idea that the labor theory of value, that your value comes from labor and you are entitled to the fruits of your labor.
Mm-hmm. So
And
your labor is like your property in
yeah.
that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Your time, maybe your
Mm-hmm.
effort. Hmm. Yeah, I definitely see value in some things in terms of like regulating prices, like you're saying, what were these necessities? Like I know like the biotech or the pharma industries have been regulated pretty decently by
Mm-hmm.
like the government. I think they should to some extent
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of like this water thing, right? It's like we have this insulin and we produce it, um, and it costs this much to make, but we're gonna charge you like 200 times that because if you don't get this, you die.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like some things where the free market maybe you shouldn't have like a total free market. There should be some things in place, and those kinds of things make sense. Maybe with like you were mentioning with water,
Yeah.
maybe energy. I don't know, energy costs,
Food.
things that that keep you alive.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of the different economic systems. Oh, one thing I was thinking too is like whatever rule people make, there's always going to be somebody gaming the system. It's
Yeah,
just guaranteed.
yeah.
So you always need to have like, in some sense, an assumption of good faith with like a certain small portion of your resources and efforts devoted to fighting off freeloaders
Mm-hmm.
and exploiters.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how those things arise over time.
Hmm.
These systems. So there's also like there's like some moral questions, right? I think maybe we've talked about this, and maybe not on the podcast, but like what was it in the Hebrew tradition? Like banking or what is it, debt
Hmm.
was considered maybe not ethical or immoral to
Oh
do,
yeah,
or
that's from, in a lot of cultures actually they call it usury. And
mm-hmm,
it was considered a sin
mm-hmm,
to charge somebody money for money, right? The
yeah,
idea of interest,
right,
they considered that a sin.
right. Well, when you mentioned people exploiting or gaming the system, that's immediately kind of what I was thinking.
Hmm.
Is time also has some value. So if you get a huge sum now and pay more later, it makes sense. But it was seen as immoral. And what was the case? Just because people were getting hoodwinked, or
I think that's part of it,
yeah,
and it like, the idea that gambling is immoral. Well,
mm,
why?
mm-hmm.
Well, part of the reason is because it can become addictive. Number one,
Right, you're in a trap.
and number two, people presenting the games tend to rig them,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like shady on both fronts.
Yeah,
Um, but the usury thing is usually having just crazy high interest rates and just taking advantage of desperate people.
yeah. Because once you're in there, then you're had.
Right, and you have to borrow money to pay back the debt, which gets you more in debt.
Right, it's like this indentured servitude kind of thing, and you're getting more in debt the longer you're there, and you're just basically a slave.
Yeah, and your interest rate is like 30% or something
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous.
Another criticism too I've heard of the banking industry, at least in terms of like just total free market capitalism, is it also just with the way it's structured with these interest rates, but also the way the government pays these banks to loan money to. It's basically starting out in debt, so it's like no way out of it. And over time, if you look at like the economy on like a large scale, everything is slowly getting funneled like to centralized banks and large institutions.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if you've heard that argument or
Well,
idea.
I mean, you could argue that that's what taxes do, right? They just like siphon a little bit off the top and just keep like sending it to the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but over time, it's like a trend of inequality
Mm-hmm.
of access to resources.
Hmm.
And then the threat is when that inequality is too large, someone's holding all the cards.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see how a system like that not like have some kind of oversight, so making sure people are playing fair and not exploiting. I could see how that can get out of hand. And to me, that's like I can see where this total free market capitalism can maybe need to be reined in a bit, but I don't know what that looks like. Just like on an idea level.
Yeah, well, and I think right now we're in a weird situation where, like, what would you call it? Big corporations, like
Mm-hmm.
big tech, and you know, big government institutions, right? The military industrial complex
Mm.
is more powerful than elected officials.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm not sure when that happened exactly, but it seems like people who are elected don't really hold the power.
It is a weird thing, right? And so it's like now these like Googles and Facebooks and these kinds of places are like have more pull just because of the economy and the money involved. But not only that, like the communication,
Right.
it's getting weird. So they call that that's a different kind. That's what is it, an autocracy or what is that?
Technocracy
Technocracy is what I've
is
heard.
the idea is, yeah, ruled by technology.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but the it's not clear that if it's purely technocracy, because like what is certain organizations like the NSA, right, or the CIA. I mean, clearly they're using technology,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not domestic,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not a corporation where you can buy
Yeah.
devices.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows what kind of technology they have
Yeah.
access to?
I forgot who it was, but it was definitely some famous. I don't know if it was an American founder, but basically was warning that if you let it go, basically the power can go to these corporations or businesses.
Well, that's Eisenhower famously warned about the military industrial
Industrial
complex.
But
Yeah.
even before him, I know there was Teddy Roosevelt, who was a trust buster because
Mm-hmm.
they saw these things happening with the railroads too and the oil
Mm-hmm.
industries.
Mm-hmm.
So government coming in and actually breaking up the free market. But it was even before that. It was like even like Andrew Jackson, maybe.
I know he busted the Fed.
Yeah, he didn't like the idea of the government having all of that economic power, but that was more government centered, not like corporation or business centered.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like it's definitely getting, or it's already at the point where these companies have a lot more power than, like you said, these officials.
Mm-hmm.
One of the weird things is I don't even know when this started happening or when it just became such commonplace, but it was all this lobbying.
Oh yeah.
When it's basically a institutionalized, accepted way of bribery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just like these companies have like 20% of their budget is going to lobbying. And it's just, oh, okay, that's just the way things go. I'm like, how is this not like just blatant and utter bribery and
Mm-hmm.
manipulation?
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
And I forget what year it was, but there was this law passed saying that anyone could make donations.
Mm.
So rather than just being U.S. interests, mm-hmm. they opened it up to international interests too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like this crazy bidding war.
Yeah. yeah. All of those scandals where Russian like Facebook stuff was happening, and it was Cambridge Analytica.
Mm-hmm.
With like it just gets pretty bizarre. All these fingers in all these wrong places, and it's like, yeah, who's actually at the helm here? And it's not clear.
Yeah, it's definitely the man behind the curtain, behind the the table, behind the closet,
behind the Freemasons, the Illuminati.
This is super tangential. I was recently watching Tucker Carlson on Joe Rogan,
Oh yeah, that was not too long ago.
and they were talking about UFOs. Like, whoa, what is this?
Well, Joe Rogan's obsessed with UFOs.
I know,
I don't
but
know.
I didn't know Tucker
Tucker.
was.
It's getting pretty mainstream. Yeah, it's getting a lot of exposure. I've always been fascinated with aliens and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
More on just like on a curiosity. The whole ancient alien thing. I don't know. It tickles my brain.
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
Yeah, and like the tying it in with all the ancient myths and legends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Could be.
could be. You never know. Reminds me of that 2001 kind of obelisk thing.
Mm-hmm. The ultimate shadow government.
Right. The aliens who all started it off. Yeah. Well, that went into some pretty fun territory there.
Right. How we doing on time?
I think we're doing all right.
All right.
But unless, I don't know if you have different topics or more on economy or...
Yeah, well, I feel for the younger generation. Like, if you were 17 or 18 in high school and, you know, the 17 or 18-year-old said, hey, what should I do with my life? You know, what's a good way to, you know, make money, have a career?
I mean, things are moving so fast. It's like when you're ready to work, I have no idea what the world's going to look like or what's going to be needed. So where do you even start? That is a pretty interesting question. Well, and you being in education, it's like, I think we talked last time. It's like, I don't even know you're not even sure what to teach them exactly. Like what's important.
Yeah.
That's a pretty wild thing to think about. And with all this AI technology coming out, they were thinking, you know, with the AI technology that all these truck drivers were going to be, like Andrew Yang was talking about this, and all these jobs are really in jeopardy from automated driving. But what it's turning out to be is the coders, where they have these AI things that can start writing pretty decent code, and it's only getting better. And that was a huge tech market. And like the AI art, you know, we have some of it for our stuff, and it's just free, quick. You type it in, you can play with it, and like, wow, that's a pretty decent image,
Right.
And like when you go to art school and you train your craft for a long time, you get certified and well known. I don't know, man.
It's rough.
Yeah.
Definitely disruptive.
Yeah. But it also makes, you know, these are like quality of life things that are good, you know. And that's the argument that I've always heard with any kind of new technology. So this is gonna, you know, change the world in a bad way. But usually things adapt. I think the scary thing is just the pace and the speed at which things are changing. Like humans are pretty adaptable. Like we have our prefrontal cortex in our brain that we can survive and thrive in different environments. But this is like every year something crazy's coming up.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the graphic designer people too. Like they learn a software and then like it's outdated. So then what? You go back to school and then learn something new and then it's outdated.
Yeah. Weird Al had that really great line. You know all about that Pentiums song?
Vaguely.
He's like, what was it? It's like, I got a new computer. It clocks. It rocks. It was obsolete before I opened the box. Right? That's the line. And that's just exactly what it reminded me of. That's how fast it's going. Oh, man.
Yeah, it's rough. Like I wish I knew what to tell young people. I mean, my go-to is always truth. And I don't know if that's because I'm a mathematician or if that's just in my soul. Like, truth seems to be unchanging. And no matter what climate, era, age, civilization, that's a pretty good bet.
Yeah, I think so. But when the truth is, I have no idea, you know, there's not much guidance there when, you know, people may need something. Yeah. So that's a tough one. All right. You think that's a good place to wrap it up? Or do we have maybe a little lighter note?
A lighter
Something
note.
fun?
Well, I've been looking into different like online business opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
school.com, that's Alex Hormozy's thing. There's mastermind.com, that's Tony Robbins' thing. And then educate.io, that's Iman Ghazi's thing.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these are intended to be online platforms, but geared towards education and business.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either go there as a consumer because you want to learn a new skill, or you can go there as a producer, as an educator to offer like a service in terms of the courses you teach or coaching, different things like that.
Yeah, that is cool. I mean, so these online tools definitely give a lot more opportunity, or just like a huge shift in the workforce that has been enabled by like things like Uber and Airbnb
Right.
and Grubhub and Shopify. People basically are making their own hours and having a little more freedom, and they're making money. I mean, they're not wealthy, but it's pretty amazing when you think about those kinds of opportunities as well.
Right. You have a car? Cool. Sign up with Uber, start making money.
Work whenever you want,
Mm-hmm.
as much as you want, you know? Pretty interesting. I don't know where it's going to go, but this whole like platform for school and education is also fascinating. It's like, why not? You know, why not take advantage of this kind of situation
Mm-hmm.
with these tools?
And I also know there are a lot of kids, more and more, who are just dropping out of high school, starting online businesses, and becoming millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the statistics are exactly, but it's definitely more than when we were in high school.
Yeah, and access to a lot of tools like video equipment for like people who want to go into movies. You don't have to go to like Fox Searchlight Studios or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Warner Brothers. It's like people are putting out good content
Yeah.
on their own, and it's really interesting.
Self-publishing.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more self-employment, I think, occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool. And yeah, I guess we'll see where it all goes.
I wish I had a good book to promote. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Buy it on Amazon.
It is a good one. All right. So, what do you think? Is that good? Good place?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Hope you found it interesting, educational, and terrifying and inspiring.
All right. See you next time.